Shakyamuni Swaha. Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha. Sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi chushe gibe sonam ki rola pinchira sangye drupara shu sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi chushe gibe sonam ki Drola pinchira sangye drupara sho sangye chodan tsoge chonamla chancho pardo dani kyaps dagi chushe gibe sonam ki drola pinchira sangye drupara sho.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Good morning. Sometimes we think we're talking about the same thing when in fact we're talking about different things, in the sense that it's normal that we end up using the same terms for different concepts. And sometimes we use different terms for the same concepts. And this happens in every language, in every context, every culture. And when I was studying at the monastery of Sera, the dialectics and debate, something I really liked was that when you would begin a debate, a discussion, regardless of the topic, one of the first things to do was to establish the clear foundation of what we were talking about. And so we would give a definition of the terms that we would use. So so we would take a subject, a topic, and before deepening it, there within that subject there are different concepts. So before discussing that concept, we would ask the definition of that concept, and then sometimes we'd spend hours talking about the definition itself. And here, there's a point. I was thinking about this before today. The topic today is Introduction to Buddhism, but before that, if we looked at what Buddhism is, one of the first questions is, is Buddhism a religion or not? Some people say it's a life philosophy, some say it's a religion, but at this point, I ask a question even before that. I mean, what is a religion? Before answering whether Buddhism is a religion or not. So my question is, what's a religion? When we study Buddhist philosophy more deeply in the first years, at the beginning, there's one one of the subjects that's studied is called Drupta in Tibetan or Siddhanta in Sanskrit. And basically, these are the various philosophical views that the different religions that existed at the time in India. So first you study the non-Buddhist views to then get to the Buddhist ones. And within these non-Buddhist views, there was one, the Gyalpa. It existed at the time of Buddha. And, you know, so when we're studying, so it's actually very, very similar to the materialistic scientific view of today. So before talking about religions or non-religions, there's a starting point that I think is very important. This fact that we all, whether we want to or not, inevitably, we live our lives in the world around us through our own worldview. We have our own worldview. We have a worldview where it's more than influence, is actually constructed. There's the social cultural context in which we were raised, the education that we received, all the information that we received, all the experiences that we live, etc., etc. So we have our own worldview. Very often, though, we're not aware of having our own worldview. Often we have this idea that religions have this interpretation of reality as if science itself didn't have it, as if any other, structure, form, paradigm didn't have it. I mean, even if you look in the scientific views, it's not just one view. There are many. Some time ago, I was reading something about quantum physics, and there are two main views about how the world is. One is very similar to the Buddhist view, and the other one I think is a little strange. It talks about multiverses and parallel universes. But the point is, every time we take a decision, every time we choose something, we do it through these filters of our own experiences, and most of all through this view that we have. The definition in Tibetan is
che vuol dire, tradotto più o meno qualcosa come Siddhanta, ossia questa visione di mondo, è quando noi abbiamo la totale certezza di come secondo noi le cose sono. Quindi vuol dire che io prendo ciò che io percepisco come una realtà oggettiva. Non lo vivo come una mia interpretazione della realtà, lo vivo come qualcosa di reale, di oggettivo. Però il fatto sta che ognuno di noi vive la propria realtà. No? Un po' di tempo fa ho sentito una frase che mi ha fatto riflettere, che ha detto che il più grande atto di fede che esiste nei tempi d'oggi è il denaro. Perché alla fine dei conti il denaro è qualcosa che ha valore dal momento in cui noi crediamo che abbia valore. Siamo tutti insieme che riconosciamo valore di una cosa e quindi...
So I heard that one of the greatest acts of faith today is money, because it's not something intrinsic. It depends on the attributed value, and many things that appear to us as being independent from us, they depend on how we live them. So this Siddhanta was having the certainty of how things are in an objective way. But our worldviews, they don't influence us. They're absolutely fundamental, because according to the worldview that we have, I then desire one thing over another, and as a consequence, I live my life in one way or another. That totally changes the way we live reality. The view that we have determines our way of living reality. What happens beyond the worldview, which is even deeper at our basis, is this strength that unites us, let's say. This, in the sense it's mm, is common to all of us. This force is often is translated as craving, sepa, this deep, deep desire, non-conceptual. It's a deep, deep desire, craving of wanting to be happy and of not suffering. We can take people from any religion, from any worldview, scientific, non-scientific, regardless of the social class or culture, regardless of their culture, even human or non-human, animals, insects, etc. There is no one that wants to suffer. All try to avoid their own suffering, and without exception, they all try to do their best that they can to be happy, to be well. And this is deeply what we want. At the end of the day, this is what we want, and this is what we all desire. This desire, this strong attraction to happiness, and each one can see where they project their own happiness. That's something else. But at the basis, there's this attraction to being well and this aversion to suffering. So, and there are two manifestations of the same thing. So, starting from this fundamental point, so quite a few years ago, thinking about this for myself, I gave myself a golden rule. I set a golden rule. Can seem very strange what I'm about to say, but I've never seen myself as a religious person. In my opinion, religion in and of itself is something that doesn't have a lot of meaning, if it just existed in and of itself, for itself. And then we'll talk about this. And at the same time, all the rules, vows and rules, this you can, this you can't. From the time of Buddha, when Buddha started creating monastic rules, behind each vow, there's a small story. He said, that time, this happened, this, that, and the other, this didn't go well, and so then Buddha created this rule, and because of that, you can't do that any longer in that context. And every time I saw rules, before accepting them or following them, if I wasn't in a community setting where there are rules where for the good of the community, we all follow them. There were, for example, at the monastery, there were rules that applied to everyone, and so even if I didn't agree, I would follow it, because not following it was not at all beneficial, to me or to the group. So when I follow rules, before I take it as something real, I want to understand a little bit what's behind it, why, what's its function. Buddha himself said, you shouldn't believe in what I say just because I'm the one who said it. Just the way you go and buy gold. When you buy gold, at the time of Buddha, 1,500 years ago, not like today where you go to the bank and you don't really know if it's gold or not. In Nepal, in Nepal and these days you can still go buy gold because it's used for artistic objects, etc. But at the time, you don't just go and buy gold. No, you have to burn it, you have to scratch it, you have to see if it's if it's really gold, or if it's just gold plated. Obviously, once I go to a store, I say, I want to buy gold, show me. I burn the gold, I scratch the gold. Of course, then I buy it. I don't just leave it there. So Buddha would say, for my teachings, you should do the same way. You shouldn't take for granted that what I say um, is, 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 is the truth just because I said it. You need to analyze, observe, to see if it makes sense to you or not, if it works for you. If you see that it works, if it makes sense, if it works, then you put it into practice. Otherwise, just leave it be. And in the middle of this, I found a fundamental golden rule for myself. Let's call it a golden rule without moralisms, about what you can do, what you can't do. Here's the following rule. We can do everything we want as long as it works. Without saying, you can do this, you can do that. No. Anything, as long as it works. What does it mean, works? Means that it actually increases my happiness and diminishes my suffering, because at the basis what we want is to be happy and to not suffer. So what do you want to do? You want to dedicate your life to taking care of your body and your and your physical appearance, and if it works, then keep doing it. You want to dedicate your life to earning more and more money. Works. It doesn't work. Okay, if it doesn't work, then look for something else. And that, for everything. It seems like it's very permissive rule. Instead, it's very restrictive. And now we'll see a little bit why. So, at the basis, what we want is to be happy and not suffer. The various views of world are based on a fundamental question, which is, what is happiness? Where do I project my happiness? What makes me suffer? What are the causes of suffering? Why do we suffer? These are the two fundamental questions that we have. Buddhism is based on these, let's say, four questions that formally are called the Four Noble Truths. And simply the first is, what is suffering? What is it that I want to avoid? Why do I suffer? What are the causes of suffering? What is happiness? And what can I do to be happy and not suffer? But these four questions, we have them all. We all have these four questions. And, even if we have never asked ourselves formally these questions, in our lives, we have the four answers. Let's try to analyze a little bit together. Without philosophizing too much, just observing how we live our lives. Because here there's a fundamental point. When we talk about life, the philosophy of life, or religion, or worldview, it's not something conceptual. It's something very deep. It's where we live our reality. I can have a worldview on one side, and then conceptually a different worldview, and that doesn't match. But the one that speaks louder is how I perceive reality on a deeper level, and not what they, maybe what they've taught me and somehow I believe. No, let's say how things are. Are we coherent, with what we think and what we do, or do we have an example? For example, let's look at these flowers that are next to me. If I asked you, are they permanent or impermanent? Are they in continuous transformation, or are they static? in your opinion? At a certain point, do they just become dry, or is it a gradual process? It's a gradual process, isn't it? So you don't need a degree in philosophy to understand that flowers are impermanent. We all know this. I mean, the person next to us, is he permanent or impermanent? He's impermanent. You don't need to think about this too long to get to the point. But if we look at the person next to us and we just open our eyes, and then when we close our eyes, we open our eyes again, do we think we're going to see the same person or someone who has changed slightly? No, it's the same person as before, but not just now. But if we're going to see the person tomorrow or the following week, we're expecting to see the same person, not someone who has changed. This means that this impermanent reality, we understand that conceptually, but it appears to us as being permanent. And we relate to this impermanent reality as if it were permanent. And here we see this contradiction, because conceptually we understand that it's impermanent, but it's difficult to actually see it, to perceive it. So when I talk about worldview, it's not about what we understand. I mean, that's there too, but it's more of how we perceive reality spontaneously. A religion, and then we'll go back to the 4 questions. But just to answer that first question that we asked this morning. So a religion is the union of 3 things: worldview, a description of how reality is, an answer to why we suffer, what suffering is, what happiness is, what we should do to become happy. There's a worldview. There's also the laws of conduct, So within this worldview, we have these guidelines, these worldviews. You should do this, you shouldn't do that, etc. And then there are instruments, techniques to help the person along the path to become more and more coherent with the view. There's yoga and sacred art and meditation, etc., etc. We have 1,000 different ways to try to reach that objective that one sets, of where one projects his happiness. To say, for example, now in the way we project our happiness and the way our grandparents projected happiness is different. If we look, you don't have to go too. We're looking at about 3 generations. More or less, maybe 2 overlap. But there's a moment where happiness was projected onto the family. So the most important thing was keeping the family together, husband, wife, children together. And then there was a moment where the main objective was work. It was work that gave dignity to life, and and one's earnings wasn't as important as actually working. And now the objective in life is to have fun. If our family is not fun, we're just going to abandon our family. If I can if I can have fun without working, better yet. I mean, objective has become enjoying ourselves, having fun. But if I project my happiness onto the family, then there are rules to follow. Instead, if it's projected onto work, then there are rules to follow. For example, it makes me think about once I read this passage in a book that a friend was reading, it was a story of a Chinese doctor who had been born in China, and she lived there until she was about 18 years old, and then she moved to Canada. And she tells the story that after being in Canada for a while, she looked into the mirror, and for the first time, she realized that she was judging herself based on her appearance. As where before, for many, many years of her life, she judged her person based on her own morality, her knowledge, her choices, her studies, and not on her on her appearance. But we're living in a time where we, you know, we're living in a time where it's said that to be happy, you need to be beautiful, you know. I mean, how much happiness do we project onto our appearance? A lot, don't we? And so if I project my happiness onto my appearance, it's so some things that I need to do will be like, oh, then I shouldn't do this because I shouldn't eat this because I'll get fat, or I should do this to help my appearance. I mean that I set rules. I need to go to the gym. I need to do this, that, and the other, etc., etc. And then maybe the objective is to having a healthy body. Okay, and so to have a healthy body, I have these rules to follow, things I should do, things I should avoid, and then I have these instruments to be able to realize that. That's clear. So within religion, we have a worldview that's mostly where I project my happiness. Basically the question is what is it that I want? And then there are these rules of conduct. What should I do? What should I not do? And then the techniques that are given to realize that objective of being happy and not suffering. Are you following? And if you see from this perspective, religion is much more is much greater than what we actually call religion. So now these 4 questions. Before we look at the view that Buddha shared with us, and very sincerely, I don't know what Buddha actually said, and if I was there, I don't remember. What I can tell you is I can tell you what has come down to me, or better yet, what I have understood of what has been transmitted to me. But before getting there, to say this, I don't like to speak on behalf of Buddhism. I don't think that I'm able to do it. I can speak based on my own knowledge and experience. In any case, let's first look at these 4 questions from our own point of view, personal point of view, where I'll try to guide you to a common answer, but I invite each one of you to find your own, which doesn't necessarily have to correspond to the one that I get to. So the 4 fundamental questions are, what is suffering? Or rather, what is it that I want to avoid? Why do I suffer? What are the causes of suffering? Remembering that the cause normally comes before the result. And so, the cause is not always suffering, but why do I suffer? The 3rd question is, what is happiness? Where do I project my happiness? And the 4th question is, what do I have to do to be happy and not suffer? So let's start with the first. What is suffering? Normally, we live suffering. We think of two types of suffering. Physical and mental suffering. Physical suffering, pain, hot, the heat and cold, hunger, thirst. These are practically these sensations that come to us through the 5 senses of our body, and when they're present, we want them to finish as soon as possible, and when they do finish, we don't want them to come back. This is the definition of suffering. Then there's mental suffering that shows up. These are all these mental states of being that when they manifest, we want them to end as soon as possible, and when they finish, we don't want them to come back. Some examples of mental suffering: anxiety. When you feel anxiety, do you say, "Oh, wonderful! I hope this just lasts a little bit longer," or you want it just to end? You want to finish. It's a form of suffering. When you're angry, is it pleasurable? You want to stay in that state of anger? No, you want it to end as soon as possible. So anxiety, sadness, fear, dissatisfaction, anger. So these are many interior states of being that are considered mental suffering. So it's the object through which the contact comes. For example, if the sound is too loud, then and it is painful, then it's a physical suffering. But if there's a sound that the sound itself is not painful, but it invokes some fears or bad memories, then that becomes a mental suffering, because it's the contact through the mind. And so here's a kind of rhetorical question: do we have more mental or physical suffering? Is there any doubt about it? There's no doubt. It is this mental suffering. This is very important because it shows us that when physical problems are resolved, it's just not enough. So no matter how much we have to eat and avoid being hungry, I mean, we're wonderful in our society to avoid physical pain. It's okay. If it's hot, there's air conditioning. Here there's a very complex system of there's a very, very complex system here for exchanging the air and cooling down the floor, etc. So we're wonderful at not being cold when it's cold, not being hot when it's hot, to not having to be thirsty, to not having to feel hunger. When we have a pain, we quickly get over that pain. I mean, we're really good at avoiding pain, but that doesn't mean that we don't suffer. One master of Lama Ganchen, I heard a recording of his teachings, Kyabche Son Rinpoche. He said, he was very direct. He was extremely direct. He had many, many anecdotes about this that, have very nice stories about how direct he was. I'm just going to tell you one. Because I apologize. So sometimes when some memories come to my head, I have to get it out, otherwise it just sticks. So once they were doing a meditation together, Son Rinpoche was there, another monk. This is at the monastery of Ganden Shartse. He was a disciple of Trija Rinpoche, who wasn't actually Son Rinpoche's disciple. But Son Rinpoche was the oldest of those present. And at a certain point, the tea is offered. But normally, when you pour the tea, you shouldn't drink the tea before the offering prayer is given, and you shouldn't drink the tea between one visualization and another. There are very clear points during the meditation where you can stop and drink the tea. So the one who was guiding the recitation, the umse, is called, and maybe he didn't want to drink this tea cold, so during the visualization of this was the dorje that represents love. That's in the heart. Is represented. Sorry. In this case, in this specific meditation, it represents wisdom and the the moon disk represents love. So without getting into to details, so in the middle of this of this visualization, the Umse started making the offering for the tea. And so Rinpoche, at a certain point, he looks around and then in the total silence says, now you take the dorje, you put the dorje in your tea and you eat it. He was very, very direct. There's so many stories like this. Also, if two people, for example, came to him, one complaining about the other, and the first opportunity, when those two people were present, even if many other people like today were present, he would say, you said this about this person, and then you said this other thing about this person, and let's clarify. And Lama Ganchen was his personal assistant for more than 2 years. He said it was really beautiful on one side and very difficult. He's the one who taught him many of the practices, the healing practices. He was a great healer himself. And before dying, So Rinpoche, he had a cassette player, these big ones, and you could put in 2 cassettes, and he would use it for ceremonies because sometimes he would do practices where there weren't all the necessary people there to play the necessary instruments, and so he would play. He would play. He would do his ceremony, and then he would have all the instruments recorded there. And before dying, he recorded a kind of will. He called his disciples, the close ones, and he gave them all the indications of what they were supposed to do. And then he went to the stupa of his master, Trisha Rinpoche. Then he came back home. He sat in meditation and he died. So he was someone very, very special. So now let's get back to us. Chepche Son Rinpoche, in one of his teachings, says, suffering is of 2 types. There's physical suffering and mental suffering. Rich people suffer mostly from mental suffering, and poor people suffer mostly from physical suffering. But at the end of the day, they suffer in the same way. They suffer the same. What's our experience? When we have a lot of physical suffering, do we have a lot of problems in our head? Or, when we have physical problems, our mental problems are fewer or less severe. But when we eliminate physical suffering, it's just not enough. So we have these 2 types of suffering mostly. And when we try to see, what suffering is, normally we see it in these terms. We could even go deeper here. There's this physical suffering, there's mental suffering, and then within the mental suffering, in some traditions, like in the Theravada tradition, it's described social suffering and material suffering. Material suffering is the suffering that comes in relation to material things. If I don't have food to eat, I suffer more. If I don't have the material resources to live in a safe place, I suffer more. If I don't have material resources to take care of my body when I'm sick, I suffer more. But if we look, we too, I imagine for everyone here, I think that our basic needs are met. But are we still suffering for material things? It's because I want something and I'm not able to get it because that thing is broken. We suffer for material reasons. But normally, in the case of the majority, it's basically from this inability to be able to discern between what we need and what we want. We want more than what we actually need. And then there's social sufferings. It's the suffering that comes from human relationships, and I think this is prevalent, the most prevalent. I suffer because with my husband, with my wife, with my uncle, with my mother, with my father, with my friend, because he said this instead he wanted and I don't want, and he understood this, all these conflicts and difficulties that exist in human relationships, and this is part of mental suffering. And then if we see, we've become very good to limit material physical suffering, but 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 mental suffering in general is very widespread. The second question, why do we suffer? Every time that we suffer, do can can we point the finger at something? Let's try not to philosophize, just to observe our own life, how we live our own life. Try to remember the last time you felt some kind of suffering, you know, small or big, or even something small. When's the last time you complained about something? What happens normally? We have this inner feeling of malaise, and what do? We try to find the guilty party, right? Try to find the one to blame. We point the finger. And normally, most of us, most of the time, to not say always, we think that we're suffering because of three things. There are three things that we see as the cause of our suffering. The first, we think we suffer because we can't get what we want. And it's not just material. It's also, you know, that reality around us is not the way we think it should be. The people don't behave the way we think they should behave. This, that, and the other is not the way it should be. If we see, we suffer much more because things are not the way we think they should be compared to actually how things are. I don't know if that's clear. So normally, if we see, one of the main reasons why we think we suffer is because reality doesn't correspond to how we think it should be. The government isn't doing what it should be doing. The person next to me is not doing what he should be doing. This, you know, is not saying what he should be saying. Things aren't the way they're supposed to be, you know. And we could just spend all day describing all the things that are not the way we think they should be. And then there's also, I don't have this, I want this. So we first think that we're suffering because we can't get what we want. The second reason why we think that we suffer is because we have to live situations that we don't like. In the first case, we can't have what we want. In the second case, we have to experience what we don't want. So they're similar, but as it's said, what is similar by definition is different. So in the first case, I can't have you should be like this and you're not. And in the second case, you are like this and you shouldn't be like this, you know. I don't like that this situation is like this and that situation is like that, etc., etc. So the first reason why we think we suffer is because we can't have what we want. And the second reason why we think we suffer is because we need to live situations and things that we don't want. The third reason why we think we suffer is because we have to separate. We are separated from things that we like, people, places, objects. when there's an object of attachment that we like and we don't want to be separated from it. And in reality, we're very simple. We're not that complicated. I don't know. I mean, do you recognize yourself in these three causes? I mean, we think about when we suffer, you know, where do we point our finger is one of these three. I can't have what I want. I I have to live what I don't want, and I need to be separated from things I love or I want. So I can't have my object of desire. I have to face my object of aversion, and I have to be separated from my object of attachment. These are the reasons why we think we suffer. As a consequence of this, where do we project our happiness? This is the third question. What is happiness? And we shouldn't be looking for a philosophical answer. Each one of us, according to the input you've received in one view or one tradition, you can have this very idealized idea of what happiness is and nirvana, etc. No, that's not what I want. Each one of you in your daily life, where do we project our happiness? And the answer is very, very simple, actually. We project our happiness. We project our happiness as a consequence of where we project the causes of our suffering. So we think we will be happy when. We'll be happy when we can have everything we want, and that reality will correspond to what I think it should be. When we can avoid what we don't like, and when we can keep what we like. And they lived happily ever after. Even if we look at the description of heaven in many, many different traditions, you know, how is heaven described? What is heaven? It's a place where one has everything one wants, is free from everything he doesn't like, and the beautiful things are there forever. No, it's like this, isn't it? In many cultures, it's described differently. But today, for example, you know, if we asked young people to describe heaven, they would say in heaven there's fast internet connection, because to go to heaven without the internet, who wants to go there? So what happens is, if we look at our own lives in that fourth question, you know, what should we do to be happy and not suffer? Let me just get straight to the point here. Very often we spend a large part of our life trying to get our object of desire, avoiding our object of aversion, and holding on to our object of attachment. I don't know if this is clear. Do we recognize ourselves in this? Let's get back to this fundamental question. Is it working or is it not working? Let's analyze a little bit. Even if we do a lot to get our object of desire, but at the end of the day, what do we want? Do we want that object of desire? For example, I love this bottle. The bottle is so beautiful. I love this bottle. I want this bottle. But do I want the bottle, or do I want the feeling of pleasure and satisfaction that I feel when I get the bottle? What is it that we want? We want the object, or we want that feeling? We want that feeling. And one of the most important feelings that we want is satisfaction. Is one of the most beautiful feelings that we can experience. And what's the nature of desire? The more I have, the more I want. And the more I want, the less I have. This is how it works. once I was with a friend at lunch who works in finance. At a certain point, he dis, he, he described he described economic he described economy, the economics was it that he had learned at university. He said that economics is a science to make it so. Hold on one sec. It's the science that allows man to satisfy these infinite desires with finite resources. So we use the finite resources of nature to satisfy the infinite desires of man. To satisfy this infinite desires of man. I mean, you know, the human. But the question is, I mean, if we take this definition that it really shows the nature of desire well, is it possible to satisfy something that's infinite? No. Even less so with something that's finite. And here we just see the big trap. So, the first question that we ask ourselves, if my first objective is to obtain everything is it possible to obtain everything that I want? Is it possible or not? And in reality, it's not possible, because the more we're able to get something, after a while, our desire wants something else, wants something more, and it's never ending. The second question, is it possible to avoid what we don't like? Is it possible to make it so that the world is perfect and everything matches? I mean, everything corresponds perfectly to how we think it should be? No, also because we relate to reality through the filters of ourselves. A simple example, I've seen many people have this experience. Someone at a certain point in their lives, often, during childhood, maybe has a strong experience of abandonment. Maybe someone close, maybe someone, maybe someone they trusted, at a certain point, the person they trusted was no longer there, or wasn't trustworthy, and the child had this trauma of abandonment. And I've seen people years later, they continue living reality through this filter of feeling abandoned. Nobody loves me, nobody wants me, nobody's here for me, and to the point where they leave, and then they come back and say, you didn't want me, you abandoned me. No, I didn't abandon you, you left. No, you abandoned me. So what I mean to say in just a few words is that we perceive and we live reality through this filter of ourselves. And no matter regardless of the situation, I bring with me my resentments, my sadness, my traumas. I bring with me what's inside. So it's not possible to live in a perfect world and avoid certain situations. And the third question, is it possible or not to avoid being separated from what we like? The rule is very easy. As soon as something starts, it begins the process of ending, and there's nothing wrong. It's the nature of things. And ending means just transforming into something else. And to begin means, transforming from one thing into another that then that transforms into yet another thing. So this idea of being happy and not suffering by getting our objects of desire, avoiding the objects of aversion and holding on to objects of of attachment is a huge illusion and it just doesn't work. I mean, this is clear, isn't it? Because I mean, facing physical pain is easy. Mental suffering is more difficult. So if this doesn't work, but we're used to this way. Once I was at a school in Milan. I've told this story many times, but it's something that really touched me, so I'm going to repeat it. It really explains well. It's the store is a school in Milan, Maria Pizzigoni. They called me to teach at this school. I didn't know really what I was supposed to talk about. There were about over like 200 children, like 5 to 7 years old, on in in a kind of school hall gym, and there were the teachers teachers there, and I said, what am I supposed to do? And they said to talk about Buddhism. And how much time do I have? You have an hour and a half. I thought, oh, okay, well, I'd never done this, but let's talk about the Four Noble Truths. And I, when talking with the children, I saw something marvelous, that when you ask questions to children, they all answer together. So instead of a great long monologue, I did kind of questions and answers from questions from my part. So I asked the children, what is desire? I was trying to explain what desire is. So I said, is there a toy that you want? Yes. Did it happen? Did it ever happen that during Christmas or your birthday that you got the toy that you wanted? Yes, yes. Um, do you still have that toy? Yes. Does it make you happy the way it made you happy before? No. Okay, you want another toy? Yes. And is that toy going to make you happy for a long time or just a short time, they said, oh, they were a little upset. And they're like, oh, just a short time. There was one boy who said, no, a long time. But you could see that he was just trying to joke around. Because we know, and they weren't special children. I mean, we know that obtaining material things cannot sustain our happiness. But what we do, because we don't know another game, we just keep changing toys. Until once I was in Brazil, we were, in front of his private airplane. He looked at me before getting on the plane. He said, the only the only difference between big and small boys is the size of their toys. Because at the end, I mean, we go from the Matchbox car to, according to, to the material resources that are available, then we get to the car and then the boat and then it leads into the spacecraft that takes you to the moon. Why? Because we want to feel an inner sensation, an inner feeling of of satisfaction and peace. That's what we want. I mean, these children weren't special. We all know since children that that it's just a big trap, but we don't have another game. We just keep changing our toys. So here we get to the view that Buddha shared with us. At a certain point, he shared his worldview, his answers to these four questions. And here you know, so Buddhism is based on these four answers. So that first question, what is suffering? Buddha described three types of suffering. It's called the suffering of suffering, which is what we talked about before, physical and mental suffering. Then there are two other types of suffering that are of the nature of suffering, but they don't manifest themselves as suffering, but they're suffering in that they should be avoided. They're not beneficial. So one thing is poison that I see as poison, and then another thing is for example, food that I like, but it's not good for me. So, so even if I'm enjoying it, I like it, but it's bad for me, it's like poison. So the so suffering of suffering is what we talked about before, and these other two sufferings, the second type of suffering is called the suffering of change. It's the suffering of change. So literally, the suffering of change, which means there are many things that we very often project our happiness onto that are not able to sustain our happiness. It's not that they are bad things in themselves, but simply they can't sustain a state of happiness. A classic example is water. If I am very thirsty and I drink water, I have a feeling of pleasure. So if I'm thirsty, where do I project my happiness? Into the water. But if I go on and on drinking water, a glass, 2 glasses, 3 glasses, a liter, 2 liters, 3 liters, and I just keep drinking, the more water I drink, do I have a greater sense of pleasure, or am I able to maintain this sense of pleasure by drinking more water? Or by drinking more and more water, does that state of pleasure diminish until it becomes suffering? So, something that at the beginning was a feeling of salvation can go on to become torturous. Another example I've always given, if someone comes and gives us, someone caresses us, someone we love, comes by us and then they stroke our arm. But what happens if that goes on and on and on with that same intensity for half an hour in that same way? That feeling of pleasure, does it increase? Is it the same? Does it diminish? It 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 diminishes until it becomes the kind of torture. Same thing with the nice music. Maybe at the beginning we really like it, but if it just goes on and on, 24 hours a day. At the time of the Second World War, they they experimented with modes of torture using music. Also, the Americans also used music as a weapon for torture not too long ago, But before, at the time of the Nazis in Germany, even beautiful music. When that music is just goes on and on and on, and without having the ability to stop it, if it goes on for weeks and weeks, it becomes torturous. So there is nothing, there's nothing that we can come into contact with through our senses, where we can say the more I have, the more pleasure, the more happiness I have. Food, music, anything that comes, a smell, a sound, a touch. There's nothing that can sustain this state of happiness. So Buddha talks about this suffering of change. There are all of these objects that appear as pleasurable, and they are pleasurable, but they can't sustain this state of pleasure, because if you maintain that contact, sooner or later they transform into suffering. And here there's a very important point. There's nothing wrong with having something pleasurable, sensory pleasure. It's not a sin. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with getting material things or having recognition of one's own image. The problem is that we project onto these things, these sensory pleasures, material wealth, and also recognition. We project onto these objects that's as being the reasons for our happiness, but they cannot sustain this happiness. The third form of suffering, Buddha called it all-permeating suffering. And just in a simple way to explain it, all-permeating suffering, we can say there's nowhere to run, there's no exit. It's described as it's the body and mind that are polluted by mental defilements and karma. In other words, no matter where I go, I'm going to live all of that through the filter of myself, through my emotions, my personality, my being, the causes that I've created in the past, this so-called karma, etc., etc. It's a little bit like when someone comes to me and says, "Oh, Lama, I would love to just take a vacation from myself." You know, it's not possible. No matter where you go, there you are. A little bit, like I asked the kids at school, have you ever seen someone, maybe someone in the family, your parents, someone who's stressed out, says that they're stressed because of work, and then you go on vacation and they're stressed while on vacation? And they say yes. I mean, why do you get stressed out on vacation? Because the vacation is stressful, or because the person is stressed? Because the person's stressed out. And similarly, if I have a lot of anger, a lot of hate, no matter where I go, I'm going to live that situation through that filter. If I have a deep sense of dissatisfaction, ignorance, selfishness, or other inner aspects that generate suffering, no matter where I'll go, no matter where I go, I'm going to live the reality through that. So all-permeating suffering is this fact that we are unable to experience anything independently of ourselves. And as long as we are not balanced and not well, we're going to live everything through this filter. And this takes us to that second question. Why do we suffer? Let's remember something. There's a very clear difference between symptom, sickness, and the causes of sickness. The symptom is how it manifests. The causes is what came before, maybe without even realizing it, but that were then created that malaise that turned into sickness. The causes of our suffering are not. It's not what appears to us directly, but very often they're things that are deeper that come before that we're not aware of. Buddha described the causes of suffering as being two types: mental defilements and the actions done based on these mental defilements or karma. So it's not the world that we're in. I mean, the causes of our suffering is not the world that we're in. The causes of suffering are mostly selfishness, this obsession of self-gratification, through which we divide the world into friends, enemies, and indifferent, through which we generate anger, hate, resentment, attachment, dissatisfaction, sadness, anxiety, fear, etc., etc. We live the world through these emotions, and then we act, we interact, and we create. The results come back to us and bring us suffering. We could spend hours talking about this, but without getting into too many details. In other words, we're at a crossroads here. I mean, do I suffer because I live in a world that is not going well, or do I suffer because I have a way of living this world I have a way, an unhealthy way of living this world? This is fundamental question. I mean, if I suffer because if I suffer because the world isn't going well, then there's no solution. You know, this is funny, but I understood this the first time I came to Albagnano. Um, the first time I was in the car by the lake, it was raining, and as we were driving around the lake, a thought came to me, and the thought was, problems exist, and they will always exist because because what's the rule? A problem is solved or ends, and then another one appears. I mean, if you look back in your own lifetimes, did you ever remember a time where there were not problems, where everything was perfect the way it was supposed to be? Maybe a few instants, but a whole day? That'd be difficult. I've had a beautiful life, and and even then I remember there was always something to resolve. So when I realized that problems exist and that they will always exist, so if I project that the objective of my life needs to be that everything is perfect and that everything should go the way I think it should go, and for there to not be problems, then I'm trapped. So my objective is not to make the world perfect. It's to have my objective is to have the resources so I'm able to face every situation, no matter what it is, with harmony and being at peace with myself and with others. This is possible. Otherwise, we keep looking, you know, it's as if I'm in a boat, you know, and I, you know, it's like I take, a bucket of water from one side of the boat and I put it in on the other side of the boat, thinking that I'm going to dry up the ocean. So this division is fundamental. Forgive me if I put a lot of if I highlight this point. One worldview says, I am a victim of the world. If I suffer, it's because the world is not the way it should be. If I suffer, it's because the people are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not the way they should be. I am a victim of the world. And unfortunately, we often do like this. The other view instead says, I'm not a victim of the world. I live the reality surrounding me through this filter of myself that I can change. I've known people like Lama Michel Rinpoche and others. That very few. It can stand. I can count them on one hand. You know, they didn't have easy lives. I think of Lama Michel Rinpoche. He didn't have an easy life. He faced many situations. If it happened to us, we would still be in therapy. But he never, in the whole life, I never saw him lose his joy and stability, even in the most difficult situations. Or if I look at the lives of his masters, I mean, they always maintained their stability, and they didn't have easy lives. But they had this inner state of balance that allowed them to live every situation without losing that balance, without losing that harmony, that balance themselves and towards others. So it's possible. So here we're at a crossroads that we need to choose. Buddha said, I am my own protector. I am my own enemy. We live often, one of the roads is I'm not my own protector. I depend on other things, and I'm not my own enemy. My malaise depends also on other things. Buddha said, no, I am my own protector. I am my own enemy. My happiness depends on my own choices, on how I live reality. And my suffering as well. So this is a radical choice. It's not a joke because the way we live, the way we project our happiness, we victimize ourselves. So what I try to remind you often, one of the first steps, a deep step to follow, to be able to follow Buddha's teachings, is to stop victimizing ourselves, which doesn't mean that some relationships are not harmful. It's not. We're not justifying any kind of unhealthy or violent behavior, but the way I live things, the way I live the reality, there is this path is possible. So why do I suffer? At the essence, it says the cause of suffering comes from our selfishness, which is caused by ignorance. So selfishness is this strong, strong desire of wanting to be happy and not suffering, but directed exclusively towards the I and the my. When we act with strong, egotistically, we 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 divide the world into three categories, and then that becomes those three becomes 3 multiplied by 3 becomes 9 categories. The first 3 are friends, enemies, and indifferent. He who is good to me is my friend, so I have attraction to this person. Someone who's good to me he's my friend. The enemy of my friend is also my friend. The enemy of my enemy is also my friend. So the one who harms me is my enemy. I have aversion. The one who is wrongs my friend is also my enemy, and the one who is good to my enemy is also my enemy. Then there are also those who are then we have indifference to those who are neither good nor bad to us or to our friends or to our enemies. So we divide the world into these 9 categories. Even if we're just walking down the road and we see 3 people who are walking towards us, one person we think has a beautiful appearance and has characteristics that are similar to us. Maybe we think that another person is ugly and has aspects that we don't like, and then the third person we don't even notice. So if we're walking towards these 3 people, I mean, do we have 3 different inner attitudes toward these people or not? I mean, we're not even aware of it, but we do. There's attraction to one, aversion to another, and a difference to the third. And constantly we're dividing the world into these categories. And that's why we're constantly pushed, to have attraction to the friend and aversion to the enemy and a difference to a third category. It's very tiresome. And then when a friend hurts us, that friend becomes an enemy. And when an enemy is good to us, he can become a friend. So in reality, so friend or enemy is not objective. It depends on how I live it. And even towards friends or towards enemies, and towards indifferent ones, we have 3 different attitudes. The one who has more, is more spiritual, is richer, more beautiful, is more humble, So so if someone has more than me, then we have envy. If someone has as much as we do, is as beautiful, as intelligent, receives as much attention as I do, then we feel competitive towards that person. And towards those who have less than us, we feel arrogant towards them. So we're never relaxed. Because there are three very tiring feelings, envy, competition, arrogance, this exhausting feeling. So through our selfishness, we also need to, we're constantly comparing ourselves to others. And this all too is very tiresome. So, and this, this attitude of friend, enemy, indifference, envy, the feeling envious, feeling feeling arrogant, feeling competitive. Then we have feelings, all these negative mental defilements. This all comes from our ignorance, and this is a key point. This is key, the difference between Buddhism and other worldviews, and it's a main point where here we say, that Buddhism, here we can see where Buddhism is very similar to quantum physics. But here, for Buddhism, we see it as wisdom, the antidote of ignorance, being a key to get to going, be free of our suffering. Here, as an example, let's listen to the sound of the singing bell. Do you like that sound? Let's say yes. If that sound is pleasurable, so of those three categories, it's a friend. I want to feel that feeling of pleasure again. So to feel that pleasure again, I need to play the singing bowl again. Because our natural way of seeing things, the cause of my pleasure is the sound itself. Let's make a sound that we don't like for this one.
Okay.
So I don't like this sound. I don't want to hear this sound anymore. No, the Lama, stop it. Now, if we don't analyze what's the cause of our pleasure, is the singing bowl, and the cause of this uncomfortable feeling is the scratching of the microphone. So we develop attraction to one and aversion to the other. And if we connect that there's a person playing the singing bowl, then we have attraction to the one playing. We have attraction to the one playing the singing bowl and aversion to the one scratching the microphone. And if it's the same person, then we have a problem. But let's analyze how this is actually coming about. When I play the singing bowl,
okay,
our experience of pleasure depends on 3 plus 1 factors. The first three they're called, in Buddhist teachings, it's called contact, rekpa. It's the union of three things. A sensory object, so vibration in the air, sound, sense power, or rather our actual hearing, physical hearing, and sense consciousness, that part of our mind, of our brain, that's able to take the signals that come from our hearing and then elaborates them, so that we perceive that sound. So sense object, sense power, and sense consciousness, sound. So when I hear the sound, it's that union of those three things. And then to these three things, each one of us attributes something different. If in the past, every time I heard a singing bowl, I got a shock, then I'm going to connect myself with that that sense of suffering. And so I don't like that sound because the meaning that I attribute to it is an unhappy one. Let's analyze. So the first one, this the sense object, what I hear and what you hear, is it the same or is it different? I mean, what the vibrations that come to me and the vibrations that come to each one of you, I mean, it's similar, but as we said before, that which is similar is by definition different. So even so here, we can't say that we're listening to the same thing. The sense power, even if we're all human beings, not all of us, when the vibrations come to our hearing, the way we perceive the different vibrations and the frequencies, is it the same or different? For example, according to our age, we perceive frequencies differently. I was told once that some luxury goods stores, they don't want young people there, and to keep the young people from frequenting their stores, they actually put this sound with a different with vibrations that young people, like adolescents, can perceive, but adults cannot, and it's something very disturbing. But even if we are all the same age, are we hearing this? Are we hearing the same, or is it different? And what about our sense consciousness? It's different too, and the value that we give to it is totally different. So, if we analyze a bit, philosophize a bit, are we listening to the same sound or a different sound? It's different. What we see, what comes to our eyes, light with form and color. And what do we do to this light that comes to our eyes? I mean, we perceive it through our eyes, our sense power, our and then we attribute a meaning to it. It's the same thing with verbal communication. As I'm talking to you, it's not words that are coming to you, they're just sounds to which each one of you attributes a meaning, a different meaning. Every once in a while, that's why I say, have you understood? I mean, but what you've understood, I don't know. Sorry, that's also why I try to repeat the same, like, important things, in 20 different ways. And so sometimes people say, "Oh, Lama, how beautiful that you said this, you explained this," and I think, did I say that? Because verbal communication just doesn't work right from the beginning. Because what happens in verbal communication? I have feelings and concepts, emotions, and I want to translate them into sounds that come to you. And what you do on your side, you receive those sounds and you reinterpret them by applying your meaning. And it's almost impossible for the meanings to be the same. I mean, it can be similar because we speak the same language, but we have this convention of concepts and sounds, but it doesn't mean it's the same. Is this clear up to here? And when we see what appears to our eyes, form and colors, light. It's the light that touches the objects, reflects back onto us. It touches our eyeballs, and according to the frequency, then they're perceived differently. Like the light spectrum, for example, as human beings, we can only perceive a minimum part of the light that actually exists. The light that is recognized by the scientific world. Other life forms with different sense powers are able to perceive perceive light rays that we're not able to see. It's said that bees, for example, can perceive ultraviolet rays. So, and colors also appear to us differently. Like, for example, this. What color is this napkin? What would we say? Is red. And it's not a trick question. It's just a simple question, objective. What color is this napkin? Red. We all agree. Now, and now here's the question, the trick question, why is it red? Our answer would be because it's red, you know, they use a red dye to make it red. It's red because it's red. That's the wrong answer. It's red because the light touches the object, comes back to our eyes with a certain frequency that we as human beings perceive as red. For example, if I take a plant, I put these two together. Are these similar, these two colors, or are they very different? One is red and the other is green. But if I asked a dog, they're practically the same. They're like two shades of gray, because dogs have different sense power, visual sense power. So when we see reality, even red, it appears to us as red objectively speaking. But if we analyze, is it subjective or is it objective? Even color is subjective. Beyond the meaning that we're going to attribute to it, the color itself is subjective. So what appears to our eyes, forms, colors, to which we attribute meaning, the same thing for all of our senses. And same thing also for memories and for our projections of the future. Mental objects. I mean, we take for objective what is subjective. And here's a fundamental point here. Are we able to see how red appears to us objectively as being red? I mean, does it appear subjectively or objectively as red? When we see red, we say, oh, look at that object that to me appears as being red. Or we said, oh, look at the napkin that is red. When we hear the singing bowl, we say, oh, what a nice sound of the singing bowl, or what an ugly sound of singing bowl. Or do we say, oh, look at this experience of the vibrations in the air, and then through the filters of myself, I live this as a pleasurable experience. No, if I want to hear that again, I develop attachment to that objective. But that experience that I lived is generated. Is it generated exclusively by the object, or are there other variables? I mean, the experience is subjective, it's not objective. Reality that we live is a subjective reality in every aspect. But we live this subjective reality as if it were objective, and this is our ignorance. It's this grasping at subjective reality as if it were objective. Let's give you another example. Another example of our ignorance that generates suffering. Let's give the example that I always use. I see that it works. I don't need to invent others. Just a second. Are you able to see this piece of napkin? It's a napkin, right? Okay, look at it well. You see there's one side that is well cut and straight, and then the other one that is still straight but is not as precise, and then there's this little triangle in at the bottom, you know, you know, and it's red. Now, are you able to imagine that napkin? If would you be able to describe it? You can imagine it, right? So it means that you have generated a mental image of the napkin. Now, here's the napkin again. Is it the same napkin as before or no? It's the same napkin, isn't it? Yes. I agree. Okay. And I can spend all day asking you the same question. Is it the same napkin? Yes. And let's go on and on. It's at a certain point. Now I ask you, is it the same napkin? Spontaneously, we would say, yes, but let me, if I, you lend me your car and I bring you, I bring you, I return your car in two pieces. It's not the same car. So it's not the same napkin. So as you see this napkin cut in two, do you still have the mental image of the napkin before? Is it the same mental image that has changed, or is it new? No, it's new because you have both of them. And now if I cut this into smaller, or rip it into smaller pieces, now we have a third mental image that's been created, and we'd be able to describe all three. Now let's observe a little bit. Every time that I asked you if it was the same napkin or not, in reality it had changed a bit. It wasn't identical because it was in constant process of change. But for us, it was the same because it was still able to sustain that mental image that we had created. So when we see a person, an object, a situation, we generate a mental image of that person. And as long as that person can sustain that mental image, we say that that person is the same. Even if the person is changing continuously, the day that the person is not able to sustain that mental image, we say that that person has changed. And then we generate a new mental image. So this shows us that we relate to situations, objects, and things through mental images, like photographs that we make of every situation that we live, every minute, every place, every person we meet. We take a picture. Remember, when there's a photo, there's there's the the photo of the person, but then there's also the quality of the camera, of the paper, the choice of the photographer. It's not purely a result of the object that has been photographed, but is a result of many different variables. Like, have you ever taken a film? Like, for example, have you ever watched a movie and then watched it again years later? Is it the same or is it changed? You know? You know? We feel like it's different, but it's not like the director came in and changed something. No, we're different. So when we take a picture, what changes is not just the object, but also the observer. So, but we still think that the photo needs to correspond. So the reality that is impermanent, but it appears to us as being permanent, and we relate to this reality that's impermanent as if it were permanent, and we suffer tremendously about for this aversion, attachment, etc. I don't know if you've ever looked at yourself in the mirror and said, "Oh, I've changed." This happened to me, not with the mirror, but one day I took a small drone and I was testing it out at home, and I I took a picture. I took a picture from above, and for the first time, I realized that I'm losing my hair here, and I thought, oh, what a good sign! I'm alive, you know. But sometimes we can also just feel shocked when we see changes. But the real shock is because are attached to this idealized image, a photograph from the past, and we expect that the object continue the same way that we like. So a real form of ignorance is relating to an impermanent reality as being permanent. So there's this ignorance of when we relate to what is impermanent as being permanent, and then we also, there's the ignorance of relating to that which is subjective as being objective. And this relating to something that is subjective as being objective, something that is interdependent, relating to something that's interdependent as being independent, this creates a lot of suffering, because if I hear the singing bowl and I attribute my happiness to the playing of the singing bowl, then I become dependent on the playing of the singing bowl to become happy. So in that way, it's as if we exist independently from the experience, but if instead we're interdependent. When we see, so here, attraction, aversion, anxiety, all these negative minds are born from this. Like, I mean, we suffer tremendously from anxiety. It's frightening to see. I mean, when you see how much anxiety is present in society today. But what does anxiety come from? It's from this present moment, what we're living, or the attachment to the future, that this uncertainty towards the future, the fear of how things will be, or the fear of things not being the way I expect them to be. It's our relationship with the future that's unhealthy. And there's mental suffering again, projections. And this comes, at the end of the day, this comes from selfishness, that comes from our ignorance. And this is why Buddha said that the primary cause of suffering is ignorance. This ignorance means living reality in a way that doesn't correspond to how it actually is. If someone wants to deepen this point, this correct view of reality, there are many, many teachings, also teachings within in modern scientific views, even like quantum physics. Some time ago, I read a book from an Italian physicist called Carlo Rovelli, and he wrote a book called Helgoland, where he explains quantum physics. And there's actually a chapter dedicated to Buddhism and the thought of Nagarjuna. And I can't say that it's exactly the same, because I don't know the science as well, but it seems it matches completely the explanation, the Buddhist explanation of suffering. So here again, and it shows us also this third question, is it possible to be happy or not? How do we become happy? And Buddha talked about nirvana, which literally means beyond suffering, means an inner state of being where one lives the world and reality and everything, himself and everything that surrounds him, with coherence. When one sees, one lives, one sees that which is subjective as being subjective, what is impermanent as being impermanent, interdependent as being interdependent, where one relates to everything with a state of love and respect and gratitude, harmony. In other words, where one is at peace with himself and with others, independently of the context in which he finds himself. To tell you the truth, when I was about 18 and I was studying in India, I asked myself, and I was a little bit in crisis, and I thought, here I am dedicating my life to Buddhism, but do I really believe that it's possible to reach nirvana, or so-called enlightenment? And when I was studying more deeply, and I looked and I saw those first steps, I thought, they're so difficult. Is it going to be possible to actually realize this? And I spent about a year reflecting, and luckily I'm very slow. Before I make a decision, I really need to be certain. And along this process, I spoke with 3 masters. One was Lama Michel Rinpoche, and then Geshe Thupten Rinchen, who was my main philosophy teacher, and then I had a personal encounter with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So I'm just going to summarize all 3. First of all, it's a graduated path. It's not that you're here or not here. It's not black or white. There are many, many shades of gray. There's a very gradual and graduated path where you have a little less arrogance here, a little more patience there, and little by little we get there. And as Geshe Thupten Rinchen told me, he asked me, is it possible to diminish one's anger? Yes. I saw it with myself. I saw the people around me. It's difficult, but it is possible. What's the limit to diminish anger? To not get anger and to not get angry anymore, independently of the object one encounters. Is it possible to love more people? What's the limit of love? I mean, up to what point can you love? You can get to the point of loving unconditionally. So we love independently of who you are and what you do, for me, or So we love normally in a conditioned way because it's in relation to the I and the my, and the same for other qualities, patience, love, concentration, wisdom. It's tiresome, but it is possible to increase. So it's possible to gradually to eliminate the internal causes of our suffering and generate and perfect the qualities of happiness to get to the state of nirvana. So it is possible, but it is a constant training, because our being, physically, mentally, emotionally, all the aspects of our being, we are in constant transformation. And every word that we say, every thought that we have, every choice that we make every interaction shapes and transforms our being. So is it possible to reach a state of peace, a so-called nirvana, reach Buddhahood? In Tibetan, Buddha is said Sangye. Buddha is a state, not a person. And Buddha Shakyamuni was a person, and he was given the name Buddha of having reached the state of Buddhahood. It's like when someone graduates and become a doctor. And when they translated Buddha into Tibetan, they decided not to make a literal translation, but to make a translation based on meaning. So Buddha means enlightened one, but in Tibetan it's Sangye. Sang is eliminate and develop. Sangye, eliminate, develop. So I mean, he or she who has eliminated totally his own mental defilements, ignorance, conflicts, etc., the causes of suffering, has completely eliminated, and at the same time has developed to his maximum or her maximum potential all the qualities. It's like darkness, you know. As the light enters, there's less and less darkness. So it's not about eliminating negativities. It's about generating qualities that counter oppose the negativities. But it's not possible to reach nirvana like a place where everything will be perfect, but it is possible to reach an inner state of being, of peace and harmony, where one is at peace and in harmony with himself and others, independently of the people that are around him, the place he finds himself in, the situation he finds himself in. And now here comes the fourth question: what should we do to not suffer and be happy? And this is a huge subject that we're not going to open completely. But this here is, we talk about the path, the Dharma. It's a path that we need to follow. We need to walk with our own legs. Buddha himself said, there's a very famous verse where he said, I can't take away your suffering the way you sweep away dirt. I can't take away your mental defilements the way you wash away a stain with soap and water. I can't take my qualities and give them to you. The only thing that I can do is to show you what you should cultivate and what you should abandon. And in this, Buddha explained and he taught in many different ways, depending on depending on he was teaching to. And this is a great quality of Buddha. Even after his death, there are four different philosophical schools, because if you can see, if you look more generally, they're like steps. They're like steps of a staircase, and they're complementary, but he taught differently to different people with different capabilities and different abilities. So if we summarize all of Buddha's teachings, and Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of our teaching, and you can see an image of him here to my right, Lama Tsongkhapa, he did an amazing job of summarizing Buddha's teachings. And what he said was that the entire path can be summarized in three things: loving oneself, loving others, and having a correct view of reality. So if one were to ask, what should I do to follow this path? First of all, the first path, I need to love myself. And to love myself, in just a few words, it means I recognize what is good for me and have the strength and the determination to follow it even when it's difficult. Recognize what is harmful to me and have the strength to avoid it even when it's pleasurable. So that's the first step. I really need to be able to take care of myself. This is good for me. I'm going to do it independently of whether I like it or not. The question that we should ask ourselves when we're faced with a choice is not if it's pleasurable or not, or if it's easy or if it's difficult, but what's good for me, what's bad for me, what's for myself and for others. A classic example in our times would be a diet. Is there something that's bad for you, but you like eating? For me, many things, and in the last couple of years, my list of restrictions has gotten longer and longer. But then, for example, I can't eat dairy, which I love, or cheese and yogurt. But if I eat it, then I just swell up. So I shouldn't eat them. Because even if it tastes good to me, it's poisonous. So loving oneself means taking care of oneself on a deeper level, beyond the appearance of that moment. So I need to cultivate what's good for me and abandon what's bad for me. And as we go on, we learn more and more what's good for us and what's bad for us. It's our ability to cultivate and maintain what's good for us and abandon what's bad for us is called morality. So it's morality understood as our ability to maintain and maintain our commitments. And in just a few words, the first step of following Buddhist teachings is recognizing what's good for me and taking the commitment to cultivate them, and recognize what's bad for me and take the commitment to avoid them. And then we recognize that the causes of our suffering are mental defilements. So here we look at our actions of body, speech, and mind. What are the actions of body, of speech, and of mind that are good for me, and what are bad for me? One should try to cultivate those that are beneficial and abandon those that are harmful. And here I take advantage to give you some practical advice. Maybe you've recognized that there's an emotion that is harmful, but you're not able to stop. It could be laziness or anger or jealousy, feelings, minds that are harmful, but when they appear, we are not able to not follow them. So the path is done in two different phases. There's 2 plus 1. The first is, first of all, we should try to develop awareness, self-awareness, recognize our actions, our emotions, and be able to see ourselves. Let's take the example of anger. I see anger that is manifesting. I'm not able to stop it. I can't do anything, but at least I'm aware. I see that I'm getting angry. Sometimes people say, "Oh, it was better, Lama, it was better when I wasn't aware," because now not only do I get angry, but I also feel bad. I feel bad that I've gotten angry. But if we're there, then we're at the first step, this phase of awareness. But it's not enough just to be aware. There's still a long path ahead. That second step, I see anger is coming. I see that I'm getting angry. I don't block anger, and it could be fear, anxiety, jealousy, attachment, and for any negative emotion. I see that anger is coming. I don't block it, because if I try to block that emotion, it's going to overwhelm me. I don't block anger, but at the same time, I don't follow it, which means I don't follow it physically. I don't take decisions. I don't follow it. I don't follow it verbally. I'm not going to speak through anger and bite my tongue. And the third level is to not nourish the anger through thoughts. I don't get into an internal dialogue with anger, where I say, well, if that person hadn't done this, then I wouldn't have gotten angry. Well, I know I'm not supposed to get angry, but did you see what that person did that? It's not my fault if I get angry. Look what they do to me. So one gets into a whole inner dialogue of, so that second, so awareness, I don't block, but I don't follow with body, speech, and mind. I watch from the outside. I like the image of a great tree. A great tree when there's strong wind, and one needs to put energy in the roots, and the leaves and the branches are flexible, so the wind comes and it goes, but one stays at his center. That sensation, that feeling comes. I don't block it. I don't follow it. I watch it a little bit from the outside, because you tell me, it's going to pass. Has it ever happened that you got angry and you stayed angry forever? No. That strong emotion comes, and then after a while it goes. Maybe then also, other feelings like resentment and things come, but that feeling of anger goes. So as that storm is coming, I reach for something in which I can take refuge. I remember my guru. I recall a place where I feel safe. I recite a mantra. There are many other places where one can go to not give energy to the anger. And then the third step is to repeat the second. So, when it says that third level, I don't block, I don't follow. I'm a little bit distanced from that emotion until it completely passes. Let's remember that our emotions are habits, and habits change. We change our habits by not nourishing them, by not repeating them. So that habit comes and we don't nourish it physically, verbally, or mentally. And, so then I try to generate the antidote, the opposite mind. And here there are many, many techniques with meditation, and I'm not going to open that door now. So here one induces a virtuous state in oneself. So it's not spontaneous. I don't spontaneously feel love. It's not natural, but it's sincere. Here we say often, it's better to be an artificial altruist than to be a spontaneous selfish. So it's not false. We're talking about putting energy into we're talking about putting energy into generating states that don't come spontaneously but are sincere. You know, so you know, so I see someone in need. I spontaneously, it doesn't come to me to help, but then, I recognize that. I go back, and then with effort, I go and I help. It's sincere, but it takes training. So this is that first step of loving oneself, and the second step, loving others. So loving others also means understanding that, selfishly speaking, I mean, because let's tell the truth. I mean, are we obsessed with the I and the my? Are we selfish? Yes. So selfishly speaking, it's much, much better to be altruistic and understand that this second part of the path, altruism, doesn't exist in opposition to selfishness, because sometimes we think that to be altruistic we need to stop being selfish. Instead, no. This is my perception. Altruism is an extension of selfishness, because selfishness is I want to be happy and I don't want to suffer. Altruism, I want I don't I want to be happy, I don't want to suffer, but your happiness and your suffering is as important to me as my own. It's I don't stop looking at myself when I'm looking at the others. I'm expanding this attraction to happiness and this aversion to suffering. It's, as I talked about at the very, very beginning, that force of wanting to be happy and wanting to avoid suffering, and we're going to expand that strength, and we allow ourselves to see others, and we see that others are as important to us as ourselves. So their happiness, their suffering become as important to us as our own. And the third part of the path has to do with developing the correct view of reality, which means living reality in a coherent way, in the sense that what is subjective is lived as being subjective, etc. And to do this, the Buddhism has three parts: view, the study, I learn, the philosophy. One tries gradually to change one's view, conduct, what I should abandon, what I should cultivate, the rules of my life, and then techniques and instruments, recitation, meditation, sacred art. There are thousands of things, to help us with this constant training. Someone asks me, well, if I want to follow Buddhism, do I have to abandon my religion? So, sincerely speaking, my objective is not to live in a Buddhist world. I don't want everyone to be Buddhist. What I deeply desire, what I want, is that there's more respect, more harmony, less anger, less arrogance, etc. And through Buddhism, I found a valid means. But what's important is that we walk. But it's not important what we call ourselves. It's not important to have the membership card of being Buddhist. But what's important is how we are following our life's path. And let's remember, there's a difference between a spiritual path, religion, and religious institution. The spiritual path is this process in our process of developing our qualities and overcoming our conflicts and unhealthy conditioning, and to realize those 3 points. And the religious institution sorry, and religion is the religion is the structure to help us realize the path, and the religious institution supports the actual religious structure. So, and the spiritual path is a necessity because we're constantly walking and cultivating one aspect or another. So I leave you with one reflection, just ask yourself, what is good for me? What is it that I want? Do I want to live in a perfect world? Do I want to learn how to live with harmony and peace in the world that I live in now? Because this changes the priorities that we have. It changes the the direction, the energy that we put into. And let me remind you that sooner or later we're going to die. We all will, you know, you know. And even if I were to live, like my grandfather who's 98 years old, but I mean, life just goes by so quickly. I mean, it's already June. These, I mean, even these last 6 months, did they go by quickly? I mean, I think they just flew by. I mean, soon, before we know it, it's going to be Christmas. So better to go out and buy your gifts now and get ready. And so, and what I mean to say is that life goes by very, very quickly. It's no joke, and we live. Sorry, if I just say once, if I go on a little bit, we live in a time that's quite worrisome, where there's a level of manipulation and sensory stimuli that is frightening, much, much more than any generation past. We are constantly, constantly bombarded by information, and we have literally in the palm of our hands, we have a tremendous amount of information. There's a famous book in Buddhism called Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. Instead, we have the distraction in the palm of your hand. So, and and if we give into that, just the days just melt, and the day goes by, and we've concluded we've done nothing. But I want to say something. If you want to tell the story of something that happened from about one friend to another, the way you tell the story, is it influenced by the relationship you have with those two people? It's heavily influenced. And so think about that with all the information you receive, and remember that the truth is found between the truths. So social media, newspaper, television, the news. So what I mean to say is we're constantly bombarded with a tremendous amount of external stimuli, and time just goes by. So I beg you to try to diminish your distractions and put more focus on what is more important to you and your daily life. What is more important? And it's not really what's happening here or what's happening there. The economy is in its nature is up and it's down. Or is it possible for there to be an infinite economic growth? No, now we're in a time of economic instability and crisis, So, the bubbles are bursting or whatever it is, but what's important is to recognize that there are highs and lows, And now our economy we're living at a time where economy is going down. Okay. There are times where There are times where we need to be home. There are times that we need to be we can be out. But we're living many different experiences. But what's important is not what's happening, but how we live these situations. That at the end of the day, at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, what's important is not what I bought, what I didn't buy. If I worked hard, I didn't work hard. I mean, because we always work hard. In the end of the day, we always get tired. What's important is what I have become. Have I bettered myself? Am I a positive interdependence in my interdependence with others? Am I a positive interdependence or not? Am I doing my share to help to better the world around me? So, we need to go to bed. We need to go to bed a better person than the one that woke up that day. Just micro steps at micro steps. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and gradually we grow. And this is what I ask you. Don't let life go by without awareness. We can live our lives by taking the reins in our own hands and choosing the direction, or we can live our life by surviving and reacting to situations. If you think that that's the right way to do it, try to do it for yourselves as well. So I tried to give a general image of Buddhism, these 4 questions, mostly, that formally are called the 4 Noble Truths. One can deepen, learn, but what's most important is that as we learn, we should put it into practice and apply it to our daily lives. So now we're going to finish here and do our final dedications. In our tradition, at the beginning we establish a motivation, and at the end we dedicate. And then this afternoon at 3:30 there will be the ceremony of the taking of refuge, which is something very specific. The taking of refuge. For many years I did it privately when I was asked, but after a while I saw that I wasn't able to organize the time for that. And people had to wait a long time. So now I've decided once a month to put it in the calendar. So everyone is invited. Everyone is welcome. It's a moment where one formalizes one's desire to follow the path. You're welcome to come, even if you're just curious. You're not obliged to actually take refuge. It's something that is fruit of a long reflection. But this afternoon at 3:30, everyone is welcome. You can come because you're curious. You can come to take refuge for the first time or to renew your refuge. You should never feel obliged to do something, especially thinking, oh, well, others are doing it, I should be doing it too. No, you should feel really at home here. So now it's time for our final dedications. I deeply thank you for being here today, with your open mind and open hearts. So please put into practice what you find beneficial.
Rapten chi nam karatin le chokchur ge padan lo san tempe dreme sasumgi Drobe Munsela Takto Ne Gyuruchi Kewa Kuntu Yanda Lama Dang Dralme Cheki Pela Longche Ching Sadan Lamge Yunten Rabzo Ne Dorje Change Kopa Nyurtoba Shu Nimo Dele Tsendele Nime Kuyan Dele Kshin Nintsen takto delekpe kuncho sumki chingi lo kuncho sumki ngodrubo tsol kuncho sumki trashi shun.
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Trashidele. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice lunch.